everyone, it's Julia Cicha from FCBarsa.com. Today it is my pleasure to talk to Simon Cooper, an awarded journalist of Financial Times, author of numerous football books and a person who's seen FC Barcelona from the inside. His latest book, Barcelona, The Rise and Fall of the Club That Built Modern Football, has been recently published in Poland by SQN, and I had the chance to read it. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that there are Polish and English subtitles available. If you wish, you can always turn them on. Also, if you like this interview, please leave a comment, a thumb up, or subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Simon, thank you once again for joining me, and let's begin.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to start with a Johan Cruyff quote that you mentioned several times in your book. Salid y disfrutad. So basically, go on the pitch and have fun, enjoy yourselves. Do you think that this is the thing that Barca has lost in the last couple of years, and now it begins to somehow restore it?
I think the idea of Barca football is that it's expressive. We have the ball. We are 11 autonomous players making decisions for ourselves. Every player has a job to give interesting passes, to think like a playmaker. And we attack. So in some ways, it's like the football you play as a kid in the street. It's about self-expression. And I think that in the later Messi era, the game became Messi doesn't defend. We defend, we chase, we fill the gaps that Messi leaves because he doesn't defend. We get the ball to Messi, he wins the game. And it worked quite well until it stopped working, and with the 8-2 against Bayern in particular. And that wasn't a very enjoyable game for, I think, most of the players. And Xavi, I think, partly because you don't have a Messi figure anymore, Xavi is recreating the possession game, 11 attack, 11 defend, goalkeeper is first attacker, strikers are first defenders. And when that works, as it has in recent weeks, I think it's the most enjoyable football to play.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. And in the first part of your book, you focus a lot on FC Barcelona being a local Catalan club. But today it is at the same time an international huge brand. So in your opinion, what is the main reason for this huge growth in popularity of this club? Is it only Johan Cruyff and his philosophy that was later developed by Guardiola and Messi, Xavi and so on? Or are there many more reasons?
I mean, people were attracted to the club playing the most beautiful football many of us have ever seen. And especially in, say, 2005, 2015, in that era, the absolute highlight. Cruyffian football reaches its apogee, developed by Guardiola, who's the son of Cruyff in football terms, and, expressed by Xavi, Iniesta, and Messi, this amazing generation. But it was also Misco and Club, especially in those years, I think more than now. It was Misco and Club, and that attracted people more than a club because it was local players. You got most of the team coming out of the Masia for many years, the great years. It was attacking football, and it was also the feeling that the club represents the region. The club was the expression of Catalonia, which was a very kind of exciting and positive thing most people felt in most of the 2005-2015 years, to be expressed and to be part of. So all those elements, the football and not the football, made Barca, I think, supremely attractive in those years.
Yeah, sometimes it seems like this whole more than a club idea is about football in the first place, but then about everything else that surrounds the club. But in your book, you say a very interesting thing, that some of the sources they don't even particularly like football. They don't watch every game. They don't go to Camp Nou for every game. They just enjoy being a part of this culture of this FC Barcelona society.
Yeah, I mean, 90% more or less of the socis, the members, live in Catalonia. And most of them are Catalans, people who speak Catalan at home. Half the region, more or less, is people who speak Spanish at home, often from families who migrated from other parts of Spain. So the socis have a very strong, most of them, Catalan identity. Often you inherit your seat from your parents, even grandparents. And so going to Barça is not, for many people, part of being a football fan. It's part of who you are as a Catalan, also as a middle-class Catalan. It's a very middle-class bourgeois support base on the whole. And so it's really being part of a community for many of these people. And yeah, I mean, often people will arrive in their seats at a smaller game, 20 minutes into the game, they'll leave early, and they'll wear their finest clothes. It's not just a football match.
Yeah, it's something more, definitely. But then, on the other hand, when there is an important issue to discuss, like this morning, for example, Socis Compromissaris, they voted on the Spotify sponsorship deal, and I've read that there were like 700 people there present on this online meeting. So it's very, very few people that actually engage and that want to take part in making decisions. And basically, you can have the impression that the only thing they care about is good football and cheap prices of the abonos.
I don't think they just care about good football and cheap prices, although of course they also care about that. And Barça has frozen their seat prices for about 7 or 8 years now. It's much cheaper than at English clubs, which is not helping the club's financial problems, but I understand why they do it. But people also care about Barça being the vehicle of Catalan identity. And so anything that is done that might seem to undermine that is very sensitive. I think the Spotify deal was relatively uncontroversial, although the stadium is now being renamed to Spotify Camp Nou, which is another step away from Meeskoon Club. And I argue in the book that it is more than a club than it was a decade ago. But I think the Spotify deal was relatively uncontroversial because the socis understand this enormous financial crisis. When they start building the stadium, the debt is going to go to something like 3 billion euros, which is, I think, a record for any sports club in the history of the world. Already they're near 1.5 billion euros, which must be close to that all-time record. So the need for money is paramount right now.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned money, there's one rather sensitive topic that I would like to discuss. I have seen in your social media that you actively follow and comment on the war in Ukraine, and Barcelona is clearly against the conflict, but also, on the other hand, it continues to collaborate with one of its sponsors. It's a Russian sponsor, and doesn't it collide with the whole idea of more than a club? Is it all about money? Is the club's situation that bad that it needs to earn money whatever the way?
I didn't know about the Russian sponsor, but that's very interesting. I would say, look, for the last 10 years or so, Barça has collaborated with some very unseemly regimes. It had Qatar as a shirt sponsor. They collaborated quite closely with the Uzbekistan dictatorship. And it's very hard to keep arguing that you're more than a club, that you represent some kind of anti-fascism, which has always been a ridiculous thing because Madrid fought Franco, the city, just as Barcelona fought Franco. The idea that Real Madrid against Barcelona is fascism against democracy is an absurd false claim made by some Catalanists, and the club sometimes likes to play with that. So Barça if this is collaboration with the Russian regime, it's not the first time. Barça has been like many football clubs, collaborating with some very unpleasant regimes for years. I mean, that's where the sponsorship money is. I don't condone it at all. And I think Barca has to choose between saying you're more than a club and taking this dirty money, and they don't choose.
Yes, and if they don't choose the money, then maybe in a couple of years they will have to change this model of ownership and just sell the club to some company because right now it's really hard to sustain a club owned by socios, and there are like I think 150,000 socios right now, so that's a lot.
I totally disagree with the idea that Barca's problem is its membership model. You hear that at the club, how could we compete with Chelsea and Paris Saint-Germain when they have an oil magnate or an oil country, and we, Paul Isalas, we're owned by socios. Well, Real Madrid is owned by socios. Real Madrid is top of the Spanish league. Real Madrid has won a lot of Champions Leagues in recent years. Socios don't seem to be the problem. Bayern Munich don't have an outside oil magnate giving them money. Bayern Munich won the Champions League in 2020. So Liverpool have an owner, but he doesn't give them money. He doesn't want to put his own money into the club. Liverpool have done quite well as a club with smaller revenues than Barcelona. Barcelona, before the pandemic, were the first sports club in the history of sports to beat $1 billion a year in revenues. Now, if you're getting in $1 billion and you're still losing money and you're not winning, then the problem is not the socios model because you have the revenues. The problem is that you're spending it wrong, and that's what Barca did. Their problem has not been the membership model. Their problem has been, for example, wasting €500 million on buying Griezmann, Coutinho, and Dembele, leaving aside the salaries. Barca have made some very bad decisions, and I don't really think that the socios are the problem in that. The ownership model is the problem. And if they reform the ownership model, which they won't, Barca's whole identity is that you're owned by socios. If you reform the ownership model, you'll still make mistakes. I mean, there are all sorts of ways of owning football clubs, from the Manchester United model to the Paris Saint-Germain to the Barca model. Most of these clubs are not brilliantly run, partly because they're under pressure from fans. They're trying for instant popularity. They're run by people who often have no idea. And it's not the socios model that is Barca's problem.
So what is the problem? Is it the people who run the club, that the board of directors, that they all childhood friends or relatives, and that the power comes to them rather easily because socios vote who they are told to vote, basically, because every time you have 2 or 3 main candidates in the elections, and basically they are all connected, like Joan Laporta is connected to Sandro Rosell, to Bartomeu also, and even earlier to Joan Gaspart. So are they really capable of running this huge company? Because Barcelona is a club, but also a company and a brand. So are they capable of running it and of making the right decisions?
I mean, in the book I describe, as you say, that Barca is typically run by a small group of the local oligarchy, let's say, people from upper class families, Catalan speaking at home. They all knew each other from childhood. They went to the same schools, the same universities. Laporta, Rosell, Bartomeu, they're enemies now, but they know each other. This is a very small group of families. And it's true, it's not brilliantly run. So you see that Laporta has family members, close friends in important positions. Barca has never been particularly well run. But nor have most other clubs. Football is, Stefan Szymanski and I describe in Soccernomics, football clubs are very badly run on the whole. It's not just Barca's problem. I think the reason why they had a bad decade, well, about 5 years, let's say, after 2015, is because when you're number one in any industry, you stop thinking. You think, we're the best, we're doing it exactly right, our Masia is the best, our style of football is, the most modern. And the problem is that other clubs like Bayern, like Liverpool, Manchester City, which kind of copied Barcelona in so many ways, run by Barça associates. Manchester City is run by men who are still Barça members. These other clubs, they learn from you, they copy you, they come and study you, they see what you're doing and they steal your best ideas. Meanwhile, Barça for 10 years stopped thinking. They thought, we do everything better, we have nothing to learn from anyone else. They didn't make study visits to Munich, to Liverpool, to Manchester. And so then you become backward because, as Pep Guardiola says, football is evolution. And Barça stopped evolving. And then also, you know, when you're number one, the money just flows in. You know, sponsorship, deals, TV money, it just flows in all the time. And you think, well, we can spend it. So when Jorge Messi, Leo's father, says, give my son another pay rise, and he comes every 6 months and asks for a pay rise, the president thinks, yeah, sure, why not? We have the money. You want to buy Dembele from Dortmund, you want to pay 70 million, they ask for double. Bartomeu thinks, yeah, why not? We have the money. And so you just spend and spend. And then when the coronavirus hits, and Barça was particularly vulnerable because at some games they have 30,000 tourists in the stadium, and the tourists stop coming. When the pandemic hits, you suddenly realize, oops, the money is gone.
And there's also this the factor of motivation, because in your book you quote coaches like Arsene Wenger or Carlo Ancelotti, and they say they don't really need to motivate the players because there's no need to do it. But do you believe that the lack of motivation could have been one of the factors that led to Barcelona's fall? Because they are the players who had won everything. They are getting older, and they just didn't feel the game the same way they used to.
I'm skeptical because, I mean, I argue in the book that the role of the coach in motivating players is overrated massively. If you're playing for Barça, it means that you have risen, you've had the most brilliant career, you've been the best player in every team you've been in, and every week you've performed, because in football, you're criticizing them, I'm criticizing them, millions of people are criticizing them after every game. If a player plays badly for a few months, he's gone from the top. You know, he'll be on the bench, the club tries to sell him. So in football, the whole system motivates you every week. So players like Piqué and Busquets have not become less motivated, I think. They've just become older and worse and slower. And so I don't think that motivation is the issue. I think it can be a bit in training. So Barca's training sessions became very low intensity in the last Messi years, because Messi, Busquets, Piqué, they no longer had the pace and the strength to train 100% every day. They were preserving themselves for games. And so players at Barca, one reason they have had less physical intensity than, say, Bayern players is because of these training sessions. I don't think that's a motivation problem. I think that's what happens when you get a core of dominant older players who need to preserve their energy. You can have one or two of these guys, but Barca had too many. And so players like Dembele and Frenkie de Jong, who needed to train at top intensity and could, given their age, were very dismayed by the low intensity of training. Griezmann said that at Atletico, every training was like a match. At Barca, that wasn't the case. So I think there is a problem with there was a problem with the training session, which is changing now. And of course, the team is much younger than a couple of years ago. I mean, you still have 3 or 4 major players who are getting too old, brilliant players, you know, incredible players, best players of their generation, Piqué, Busquets, Jordi Alba. But the balance of the team is younger now, and that's healthy.
So can we say that apart from the financial reasons, the departure of Messi has turned out rather well for Barca, seeing how he plays now in PSG, or how the club is functioning under Laporta and Xavi?
It was time for Messi to go. I mean, that's cruel that the amount of the salary budget that he was taking was just so extreme. It got to near 200 million a season at the end. And I mean, I think they should have sold him in 2020 when he wanted to go. You would have got, say, 150 million euros for him. You lose more than 150 million in salary. And then you have more than 300 million euros, which is a lot of money to buy, you know, 4 or 5 significant new players, which they've done now much later with Ferran Torres and Traore and Aubameyang. But they should have done that in 2020. And so you keep him for one more season. He's still the best player in the world, but you finish third because, you know, you haven't been able to rejuvenate the rest of the team. There's no money. So it was time for him to go. I sense that Paris Saint-Germain has lost interest in club football. Paris didn't need him. You know, with Neymar, they already have a brilliant footballer who doesn't defend. So arguably Messi has weakened the team. And I think he didn't really care about being part of the Paris project. They're going to win the French league anyway. It was about the Champions League. They lost that. It could have gone either way. You know, they could be in the quarterfinals now. But anyway, it didn't work out. Paris have a very unbalanced team. And I think Messi is now playing for one more thing, which is the World Cup in Qatar.
Yeah, probably you are right. And does Barca need another Messi?
There is no other Messi. You can't buy another Messi.
Yeah, of course, but like let's say replacement for him, because they are searching for a striker right now. There are talks about Holland, but everyone knows it's almost impossible financially. Then there is Lewandowski, which is particularly interesting for our Polish viewers because he's Polish, and it would be great for us to see him in Barcelona. In Barcelona, but then there is Mo Salah from Liverpool, and does Barca really need to spend that much money on strikers who not necessarily are needed right now?
I mean, Barca have no money, and they're going to have to keep cutting their wage bill. And so Lewandowski, I think he might come on a free transfer. So I think I'm not sure if his contract expires this summer, so that might be a possibility.
No, next year. Okay,
but he's what, 32, 33, and you might get him at a lower price. And that's the kind of market that Barca can still play in. You know, you see they're looking for free transfer players. I think that's going to be very difficult to then compete long-term with Real Madrid, Manchester City, Bayern, because those clubs are not thinking who are the cheap players we can get. They're thinking who are the best players in the world that we can get. And, you know, Barca have had a great 2 months. I'm very impressed. I'm surprised by how well it's gone. But if you're going to be playing against Mbappe, against Haaland, and your team consists of good players, very good players that you're getting on free transfers, and then every week Piqué, Alba, and Busquets, you know, they lose a bit more. I don't see how long-term you can keep competing. We show in Soccernomics that longer-term salaries determine performance. And Barca are not even allowed to pay high salaries anymore. And, you know, the other clubs I feel might run away from them at the top.
Right now, Barca is kind of trying to level up the salaries, but it's rather hard because, for example, they are negotiating with Araujo and with Gavi, who are young, talented players, and personally, I believe that the club needs them. But if they don't lower their expectations, they might leave. And is it the right policy to keep being hard and just to not to go over the budget?
Barca have no choice. I mean, as I say, once they start building the stadium, the debt will go to 3 billion euros. The Spotify deal is not even as much as they were getting from previous shirt sponsors, but they've already sold the rights to the stadium. There just isn't the money. La Liga's rules are very strict, so you can't spend in the unlimited way that they could before. And so, you know, what are you going to do? I mean, how can they pay Gavi as much as he can get at another big club? And these players are unsentimental, and they play in a global market. And if you're one of the best 100 players in the world, I'm not sure Gavi is yet, but he could well become one of the best 100, then you'll get offers from teams that can pay you more money than Barca, which also means if the club is paying more money, your teammates are probably going to be better. So, you know, at some point, Pedri, Frenkie, Gavi are going to face the question, these are the best years of my career coming up. Is Barcelona the right place for me to be spending them? or is there a better club? And that is how footballers think. They don't think like fans.
Yeah, definitely. Now let's talk a bit about your work. In your book, you can see the difference between the journalism 20, 30 years ago and now. Nowadays, the access to the players is very limited. Journalists cannot attend trainings, and basically very few of them is included in this so-called inner circle. So do you think it's really for the best that only a couple of journalists have access to the team, and the rest is left out on the press conferences, and that's basically the only thing that the club offers to them?
I mean, if I were running a club, I can understand the logic in doing it. In what they're doing is they're controlling the information that gets out, but also the clubs are now publishers themselves. So the club, if the club is going to get an interview, if Messi is going to do an interview or Piqué, the club wants it to be with their channels. And it's very hard for the club even to get Messi to appear on its own station when he was at Barca. And so the club certainly doesn't want to say, oh, you go and do an interview with the local newspaper or with another newspaper. The player is only going to do an interview once, and Barca wants it to be with Barca. And so the club is really competing with journalists now in a way that didn't happen before. Now, it means that as a journalist, usually you just get rubbish. You get, maybe the player for 10 minutes spouting cliches, or the coach appearing in front of a press conference saying, well, we lost because of the referee, not because of me. And, I'd stopped writing about football most of the time because I just felt that you were wasting your time as a journalist. And one reason I only decided to write this book when I realized that Barca were willing to open their doors to me. Not every door, but most doors. And then I thought that's interesting, precisely because access to these clubs is so rare now. I thought if I can get this kind of access, then you can really get inside the club, understand how a big club like that works and things. And for example, speak to dozens of people who worked with Messi, at all levels, from the medical staff to other support staff to coaches to youth coaches. And then you start to get a deep picture, which is no longer available to most of the media. So with Barca, I got lucky. I don't think I would have got that access at any other big club. I got it at Barca because I'd spent 30 years going there, and I'd built up relationships for various reasons with people inside the club.
Yeah, because basically you can learn a lot more from the people who work with Messi than from Messi himself. Because when you have a chance to talk to him, he doesn't say much, or even he doesn't say anything interesting. So what's the point of even trying?
Well, he now, in the last few years at Barca, he gave a few interviews to journalists he chose, or not even to journalists, to this guy he knows from Twitch, the video game channel, and he decides who he's going to speak to. But it's true that Messi is not a man of words, so it's very rare for him to say anything that expresses what he means, and certainly he doesn't talk about how to play football, which is the thing that I was trying to understand about Messi, how he plays. The other thing I was trying to understand was his power in the club, that he was, as I came to understand, he's really the president. He was the president of Barca. He was the most important figure in any decisions. But I don't think he ever wanted to explain that. But the people I spoke to who dealt with him, including ex-presidents, they were able to explain that to me.
And according to you, who's the most interesting person you have spoken to while writing this book?
Johan Cruyff. Johan Cruyff is the most interesting person in the history of football.
Definitely. You describe your one meeting in his house, and that's basically a dream come true.
Except that we had a conflict afterwards, which I also described.
Yeah. If you just our viewers, if you'd like to know more, you'll have to buy and read the book.
Buy the book.
Yeah, buy the book, of course. Another thing that's very interesting and very specific about Barcelona, and it also has an influence on journalists' work, is the so-called entorno. It's really hard to explain it in just a couple of words, but there are the people around the club, like the families, agents, also journalists, and everyone.
Directors, ex-directors, people who used to work for the club, who want to work for the club. It's the entorno is a word that Cruyff, the Spanish word that Cruyff applied to Barca. It really means the surroundings of the club, all the people around it. And this is a city. I'm going there tomorrow as we speak. This is a city where people talk about Barca, the football club, all the time. And everyone knows somebody who works at the club or who was sacked from the club yesterday. And those people leak to the media all the time. So it's like this enormous ongoing discussion of people manipulating everyone else's opinions about the club.
So does it make it really hard to get real information and to even talk to someone who you can rely on, who you know that is a person who will tell you the truth and who's really worth talking to?
What I found is that most people will tell you their truth. And it's a club where, it's a city where there are thousands of people with experience of Barca and their truth. And what I tried to do, was to speak to hundreds of those people who had worked at the club, played for the club, were still there, were running for president, wanted to run for president. And you put all that together, you start to get a sense, especially over time, the 30 years that I've been coming there. And I suppose it's a bit like covering politics in Washington, D.C. I mean, it's a city where everyone has their own view and their knowledge and their inside channels to what's going on. And you have to be very critical and try and put that together.
And have you thought about writing a second part of your book or expanding the first part of the Xavi era? Because now a lot has changed since last year, and you have described the fall of the club, but now it's begun to rise again.
Yeah, I've been positively surprised by Xavi. I mean, I deal with this a bit. I'm recovering from COVID. I had it a month ago, so I still have a bit of a cough. Now you see, I thought that he was an attempt to go back to the past. When Laporta became president a year ago, his kind of idea was to go back to 2009, which is never possible in football. But Laporta himself was a figure from the early century when he was president. You buy Dani Alves, who's 38 now. You hire Xavi, another figure from the past, and you try and recreate the past glory age. And that doesn't work in football. In football, you always have to think about the future. And what surprised me about Xavi, and I do discuss this in the Polish edition, I rewrote the epilogue, I'm updating it still. What surprised me about Xavi is, although he was hired as a figure from the past, he is a future-oriented person. So he's trying to create the new football. He's trying to play the football of 2022 and not the football of 2009, which doesn't exist anymore. So in football, you always have to think about what's next. What's the next big thing? And he thinks like that.
And in your book, when I read about Johan Cruyff and Pep Guardiola, I can't shake off the feeling that one of the similarities between them is their curiosity. They are always searching for the answers, always asking questions, wanting to know more and more. And probably this knowledge lets them control different aspects of the game. So, do you think do you see the same curiosity in Xavi, or not yet?
I mean, if Guardiola was the son of Johan Cruyff, Xavi is the grandson. And Xavi is a great admirer of Cruyff. I mean, I've seen amazing video of the two of them talking football together. And so Xavi comes from this tradition. And the Cruyffian principles always work. in any period of football history. We play in the opposition's half. We dominate possession. We overlap. We change positions. Passing must be diagonal, that kind of thing. But football changes, so you have to update those principles to each new era. And Xavi, I think, has the curiosity to do that. And so it's a much more direct form of Cruyffian football than, for example, Barca was playing 13 years ago, when it was a much more horizontal game, slow advancing, and much more total domination of possession. So yeah, Guardiola, Xavi, they are, in Guardiola's phrase, maintaining and updating the cathedral that Cruyff built.
And do you believe that one day Cruyffianism will become too old-fashioned for Barca, and it will disappear completely from its play, or it's impossible and it will stay there forever?
In my lifetime, I think the best football will always be Cruyffian. But the problem for Barca is that other clubs have also adopted it. Cruyffian football used to be a revolutionary new departure. When Cruyff and Michels invented at Ajax in the 60s, the dominant game is Italian catenaccio. And it's a Cruyffian football that you play in the other team's half. You change positions. Nobody thought like this. But now all the big clubs do that. So whether it's Bayern or Manchester City or Liverpool, they all play a version of Cruyffian football. And they train their youngsters in Cruyffian philosophy. And so Barca used to be unique, and now it's not unique anymore. So the problem is not that Cruyffianism has gone out of date. The problem for Barca is that Cruyffianism has become the new consensus.
Mm-hmm. Just the last thing I would like to ask you is that in your book you say you don't think Pedri could become as great as Xavi. Have you changed your mind since then? Because I think you wrote it a year ago or something like that. Do you still believe that Pedri would not be as great as Xavi?
I said I don't think that Pedri, Dest and Minguella, who were kind of big figures a year ago, could become the new Xavi, Dani Alves and Piqué, something like that.
Yes.
And if you're talking about the three, it's clearly true that Minguella and Dest are not going to reach that level. And young players, you know, when they come up, we always compare them with the best. And almost always they disappoint because, you know, people laugh at Piqué sometimes or criticize him, but the guy has been one of the best central defenders in football for 15 years. It's amazing. And so to become the new Piqué is almost impossible. Yeah. To become the new Dani Alves is almost impossible. Can Pedri become the new Xavi? It's possible. Yeah, it's possible. And that's amazing. He's not there yet. I mean, Xavi's contribution to football history as a player is enormous. And Pedri is right at the beginning of that. Right. He's just started. He could still become that because he's great. But to be like Xavi, you have to be great for 10 or 15 years. Almost nobody manages that. So I would not bet on it happening.
So we will see that in 10 or 15 years, and let's hope he will manage to fill in the place after Xavi in Barcelona's squad. Thank you very much for this interview and your amazing book. It was really a great pleasure to read it and to talk to you. I think I've learned some really interesting stuff from your work and now from talking to you. And thank you for agreeing to talk to me.
Thank you very much, Julia. Good luck with Barca. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, now that was our interview with Simon Cooper, the author of FC Barcelona, The Rise and Fall of the Club that Built Modern Football. So basically this book has just been published by SQN in Poland, so I can really recommend reading it. It's a fantastic lecture. So it's a must-have for every Barca fan. And thank you for staying with us for the past 40 minutes. And if you liked this interview, please leave a comment, a thumbs up, or subscribe to our channel, and just come and visit FC Barca.com. Thanks.